Hello everybody, today I want to talk about some atmospheric sound design. Now honestly, when it came to the preset pack that I'm currently working on for Serum, as you can see, I have a few of them. In here we have a few atmospheres and we have some pads as well. Okay, quick pause, I just want to say that the preset pack that I'm currently talking about has actually been released and is currently on sale together with all of my other products. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you check out the Gumroad page where you can use the promo code that is on screen now to get 30% off all of my products up until the 25th of August. But it's really hard to get these kind of sounds for me personally because normally I just use something like Omnisphere. Let me just quickly open it up for you so that you can see what that means. My go-to for like atmospheric sound design and just the pads and stuff like that I want to have in my sidetrans tracks nowadays consist of going in here, going A to Z, and then clicking one of these. And then once I play it, you'll hear we get like really nice atmospheres out of that. And of course, this being Omnisphere, I can go in here to sound match and you can see that there's a whole bunch of different textures that I can choose from that all are going to have a very similar kind of sound. Now, just by the very nature of this kind of sound, these are usually done either through granular synthesis or through using samples. And generally speaking, both of these things aren't really possible to do inside of Serum. Yes, you can open this up and you can actually get some cool sounds out of this. There's even, if I am not mistaken over here, some pre-made atmospheres for you. And I've had some good results with this as well. But even these are fairly limited in the actual sound that you're going to get out of it. Of course, we wanted to pitch track if we're actually going to use it. So in that case, you can hear that it becomes fairly pitchy if you go up too high or too low. Like the texture inside of the atmosphere is maybe changing a little bit too fast or stuff like that. And of course, this is just the noise oscillator in here. If you were to actually sound design with this, you would add a whole bunch of different effects. Let's say hyperdimension, for example. Going up like this, a little bit of delay. Going up like this, a little bit of chorus maybe to really wash out the sound. Maybe a little bit less depth or something like that. And you would maybe take a reverb. And maybe you would even reverberate all the way up. Very big size, very big decay, that kind of stuff. Now that's one way of doing it, but I noticed that that isn't really getting me the textures that I wanted most of the time. Like we're missing a lot of the stability out of this, for example. Like if you play it in a low note. It gets a little bit spooky and it doesn't really fill up the frequency spectrum all that much. Mainly the low frequencies I don't really like the way that these sound. Can hear like a very low wobbling frequency. So what we ideally would want to do is get a little bit more stability out of this while still maintaining some of the textures of the sound that we already had coming out of the noise oscillator. The way that I'm going to do that is by combining two different ideas together. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on some basic pad sound design first, and then we'll turn that into more of like an atmospheric sound with a little bit more texture to it by just adding the atmospheres that we saw before. So just a standard pad, the way that I would do that is maybe just starting off with a saw wave, give it a little bit of detune, and we'll low pass that. This is probably like the most basic pad that you can go for anywhere. Maybe a bit lower. As you can imagine, this is almost too basic at this point. One of the things that I would like to do is a little bit of a steeper filter. And it's probably a good idea to either layer this with a wavetable or just replace both of the wavetables. I'm going to start by layering it. And if I don't get the right texture, the right tone out of that, then we'll also change this wavetable over here. The main idea is going to be adding a little bit of extra movement to this. So what I want to do is maybe set this to a bar. And there we get some movement. Let's also add a bend plus here, so that bends it a little bit into shape. Now I like where this is going as a start, but you can still hear the main idea of the saw wave in there. You can really clearly hear all of the clicks of the saw wave and that kind of stuff. So maybe one option would be to just randomize the phase to at least remove the clicky part of the saw wave. But honestly, I think we're much better off by just changing to a different wavetable. Let's add a little bit of extra movement, maybe a little bit of slower movement over here. In this case, maybe it's nice to change this to a sine wave. What we can also do is maybe change this to be unsynced and then slightly modulate the rate over here with LFO2. I said slightly. Now as a basis, I like that we're getting a nice tone that isn't just your basic saw wave, so we've moved away from that. Let's add a little bit of extra washing out with some effects. I'm starting off with a chorus, which I'm going to go full band for. As you can see, I've set this to high pass filter, so we're filtering out everything below 40 Hertz. On this course, so basically the whole signal is coming through. We're going to go with a dimension expander over here, again to add a little bit of extra wash, both by using the detune function of the hyper as well as the dimension, of course. And we're already kind of losing the main tonality of the sound, which is really what we're after in this stage. I'm going to go and set up the ambience for this preset here. So I'm setting on delay and reverb. And I immediately map those to macros because I know that there will be people that want to turn those off. In this case, since we're going for like a pad atmosphere style sound, it is probably a good idea to maybe have a bit of a bigger size, longer decay, and a lot more reverb than I would usually do on my presets. So this will be the ambience macro, and as you can hear, we're already getting a nice tone out of that. The final thing that we need to do to really turn this into like an atmosphere or a pad sound like we heard before is just turning up this and have this go down a little bit over time so that it has an attack stage to it and a release stage to it. You can hear that we are still getting that movement of both of these two LFOs doing their things, but you can hear that it's really sitting more and more in the background. And that is definitely what I'm going for with this particular sound. Another way that we can add movement is to add a different type of movement through the envelope, which we'll do by setting the filter cutoff a little bit down. We'll make the attack of this a little bit longer than the other one. Let's go maybe for 4 seconds here. And then also 4 seconds on the release. We'll give this a bit more decay as well, so that it nicely, slowly morphs between all of the positions here. Maybe a little bit of time that it holds at the maximum there. And then we'll set this just slightly to the filter cutoff so that it's going to open over time. It's going to stay there for a while. It's going to move a little bit lower. And then finally, when you release the note, it's also going to take some time to move down over here. So now, especially when we're playing the lower notes, we're still getting that stability from it. But as you can hear, we're lacking a lot of the texture and we're also lacking a lot of high frequencies due to this filter. And this is done a little bit deliberately because now we can start to add the noise oscillator like we saw before with some of these atmospheres over here. One thing that we would need to do though is tune these atmospheres. And the best way to do that is just to look at what key information is coming out of it if we play it in key. So I'm going to be pressing a C over here. In this case, it seems to use multiple keys, so maybe we can go for a different one. This seems to be a little bit lower. Maybe this just needs to be pitched up before it becomes clear. This is a lot more noisy, so there's not really any key information in here. I do want the texture that I'm going to add to actually contribute to the key of the sound. Okay, so this sound over here seems to be strongly focused around the key of F, even though I was playing a C. So that means that we would need to tune this down. I'm just going to count down. There's E, we have D sharp and D, and then the C sharp, and then C over here. So now it should be in key with our actual pad sound, with our actual like synthesis part of the atmosphere. It would be nice to maybe tie this a little bit more together by having the filter open up a little bit more. Of course, keep in mind that the noise oscillator isn't going through the filter, so it has a lot more possibilities of adding to the higher frequencies over here. Speaking about higher frequencies, one of the interesting things that we could do before all of this washing out that we're doing now is a little bit of saturation. So maybe just some soft clipper over here. Can bring out a lot of those higher frequencies even more with the multiband here. One final thing that I want to do is shape the lower frequencies over here a little bit more. So we'll lower this like that. We of course still want a little bit of that stability, but we don't want such a strong humming tone coming out of it. If you really want to add a stable tone to this, by the way, you can go an octave lower on the sub bass and just have that direct out over here. Now it's also immediately clear where this pad needs to be tuned in terms of the MIDI that it's getting in input, because the sub bass of course is just supposed to be in a specific frequency region. Like if I now start playing this maybe 2 octaves higher. I mean, it still works. It's not like it sounds off or anything, but it sounds very stable and very build around the idea that we have in this key over here. We have all of those different noises. We have that little swoop of the second oscillator kind of coming in and moving out again. There's a lot of interesting things going on in this particular frequency region that don't really shine through in the other frequency regions because they're just happening so high up in the frequency spectrum. Now, of course, I'm going to take this sound and turn it into an actual preset by assigning all of the other macros and then assigning the module and whatnot, and just focusing on setting up all of the parameters so that it can be easily used in an actual track. What I also want to do is I just want to make one more, just to kind of show you the progress once again. What might be cool is this time using some of the spectral wavetables. So that way I can show you that you don't necessarily have to use wavetables that are like soft and that kind of way, even though the sound design itself is soft. Because you can take a harsher wavetable like something like this. Maybe an octave lower still. This really shows the harshness of these kind of wavetables, right? The spectral stuff. Maybe this is a little bit too much movement here. Here we don't have enough mid-range, I would say. Something like this maybe. This is already a good start for like a pad that needs a lot of movement, even though this is very harsh. What you saw is the last process where we're using all of the effects to really wash it out, and then the filter to remove any of the high frequencies that we don't really want. It is fairly easy to actually get like a nice texture and a nice tone out of it, even if the starting tone is way too harsh for what you're actually going for. Again, we're trying to make an atmosphere that is kind of like soft and it's like gliding in, and it has all of those kind of characteristics. So the harshness of the initial waveform is not exactly what we're going for. Let's layer this up with something more interesting as well. Let's unsync this one again, and we'll do the same for this one, but we'll make that a little bit faster. Maybe again set this to a saw wave. Maybe we should have this be the slow LFO and this be the faster LFO here, like this. What we can do is combine some modulations. If we combine these two together, we're again going to add a nice long attack stage to this. We're going to give it a long decay and release, and we'll set that also to the filter here. And of course for our amplitude we'll do something similar. In this case what we can also do is have the filter come up before the amplitude comes up. In the other patch we did that the other way around, so switching it up may be also interesting like this. And again, generally speaking, in this case, the release stage is exactly the same. By some crazy miracle, I ended up setting up the exact same number for these two patches. But generally speaking, what I would always like to do is have the release stage of modulations be faster than the release stage of the amplitude, so that the amplitude kind of cuts off the modulation downwards over here. Because if you do it the other way around, what tends to happen is that the modulation kind of snaps down to the lowest position, and then it stays there for a while the sound is kind of like fading out, as opposed to it morphing out by changing modulations while it's still like moving down. I don't know if that perfectly makes sense, but if the amplitude is still going down and the modulation is already at its lowest point, then for the final part of the amplitude going down over here, it's going to have the same value set for any modulation that you set. So generally speaking, I have these set very similar or higher than the release of the actual amplitude over here, which of course is tied to envelope 1. Okay, let's start washing this out so that we get rid of all of those very clear kind of textures that we hear now. Again, we'll have hyper dimension. For the dimension, I always like to set my size down because that sounds a little bit more natural. I don't really like the delayed timing that you get if you set the size up. Again, chorus is just going to be here to do full band like chorusing effect. And then we'll have our delay and reverb, which help a lot with the washing out. I believe another trick that we could try is using the reverb filter over here. This one over here. And then setting this fairly low. We'll dampen that a little bit and drive it a bit. But let's see if that actually helps washing out the sound, which is essentially all that we're trying to do here. It definitely helps with the tonality of the sound. I mean, it changes it in interesting ways. So maybe that is an interesting thing to tie up to a macro. So just to show you the way that I would do that is, of course, we set the mix here. Let's use macro 1 for that because it's generally speaking where I assign the tone. And then we'll change the resonance over here. Now I know for a fact that this filter changes the phase a lot. There's a lot of phase shift happening. I believe I can show that if I go in here, reverb, and then it shows the phases. As you can see, there's a lot of phase shift happening. So moving this around would have a big influence on the actual pitch of the sound, meaning that for the modulations that I'm setting up now in regards to the tone, changing the filter cutoff is not a good idea because that actually changes the pitch. But some other parameters, maybe even something like the damp over here, it is nice to have multiple parameters change on a single macro because that's kind of what they're for. And of course, we just want a nice change in tonality when we call this something like tone, because it would allow the user to just hear like big tonal changes, which of course makes it so that the macro has an actual impact on the sound. So maybe even here, it would be a good idea that we do something like this. Let's take an EQ like this. Let's actually do this before the filter and then have some distortion in between. And what we're now able to do is we're able to modulate these frequencies over here, kind of in opposite directions. And in theory, I probably would like that the other way around, so that if you turn up the tone, it becomes brighter. That is generally speaking how that works. So now we actually have a big change in tonality over here. What I also like to do is have this distortion tied to macro over here so that you can dial in the grittiness of the patch. So we'll have a setting that is fairly gritty over here. I like to volume compensate. Again, you can click on the mix over here to change that, and these modulations stay. So now I could just set up the volume compensation here. With the distortion, you're probably always going to need some volume compensation. And this already in terms of atmosphere, in terms of pad sound, is where we want to be. And again, we can go into the noise oscillator and again, use some of these atmospheres over here. Of course, I could also import my own custom atmospheres if I really wanted to, but that really kind of sidesteps the actual sound design part of doing a preset pack like this. I believe this is the same one we used in the last one. We have to pitch track it, of course. It might actually not be. This might be a different sample, so that would be nice. Going to tune it up probably like 3 octaves. Alright, so now the last step would be to high pass all of this now that we have this kind of texture combined here. And the best way to do that would be through the EQ or the filter over here, but both of these are in use. Of course, we could use this filter over here if the mix of this parameter wasn't on the macro, because of course there's the possibility of the mix being all the way down and then the filtering not being engaged. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use a multi over here. Now this is a filter type that I don't often use, but we're just going for low and high over here. So this is almost acting like a bandpass, but it's only going to be the top part that is being modulated here because that is only assigned to the filter cutoff. And the bottom part is just being used to remove some of that low humming tonality that we have. So that's it, there we have another cool atmosphere. I now have 2 more presets that I can add to my pack. And hopefully you have also learned something interesting about sound design. If you have, let me know by leaving a like and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Another way to support me is by checking out some more of my videos, so there will be 2 up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.